There's an eye in me soup.
Give me a slice.
Happy Halloween, everyone. You know, out of all the pieces of American cultural imperialism that dominate life in Australia, this holiday is probably my favourite. Well, this and decimal currency.
What is this shit?
I love the feeling of the Halloween season and all that comes with it. The costumes, candy, and of course, creepy stop-motion kids movies. And this year, two of my all-time favourites celebrate their 20th anniversaries. Tim Burton's Corpse Bride and Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Beyond their medium and release year, however, these movies share a number of other weirdly specific details. Both set in a little English village, both starring Helena Bonham Carter, both nominated for Best Animated Feature, and our main focus today, both have a line of action figures produced by McFarlane Toys. And interestingly, despite being made by the same company in the same year, each line takes a completely different approach to translating these highly articulated puppets into somewhat articulated toys. Let's see how they compare, starting with Corpse Bride. Now admittedly, my collection of these figures isn't very extensive, but I have had these two mint in box for about 5 years now, waiting for an excuse to open them. General Wellington and Dwarf General. You know, he has a name. It's General Bones Apart. The packaging on these figures is weirdly aversive to using characters' actual names. The Clark Gable skeleton guy is incorrectly listed as Albert.
How sweet.
And despite being the eponymous character of the movie, Emily's packaging identifies her generically as just Corpse Bride in both her Series 1 and Series 2 releases. Once you bust them out of this clamshell prison, however, and finish sampling the delightful paint fumes trapped therein, we get to see the incredible detail that defines McFarlane figures of this era. The sculpting makes them dead ringers for the on-screen puppets, and the thick matte finish paint makes the colours really pop. On General Bones Apart especially, there's lots of little things like the brow lines or the black wash between the teeth that would be very easy to overlook, but including them really helps capture the character. Even the way the body is painted black to create the illusion of depth is pretty much dead on to how it looks in the movie, and you can still poke a saber through his chest for dwarf swinging action. Given the stout stubbiness of his design, it's unsurprising that his articulation isn't super dynamic, but it's really not that bad considering most other McFarlane figures at this point were basically statues with 2 swivels. He has just enough movement in his arms to raise his glass, and really, that's all he could ever want. This is one of the key ways that McFarlane has changed over the years. Their modern stuff is very akin to Hasbro or Mattel, with highly articulated, action-oriented figures that are fun for kids and adults. Back in 2005, however, they were known for pioneering a highly detailed, grungier style that appealed specifically to older collectors. This focus on display instead of play resulted in these super accurate looking figures with barely any posability, but it also manifested in other ways. Evidently, McFarlane decided that because their audience was mainly adults, they didn't need baby shit like durability and safety standards. Whereas a toy aimed squarely at kids might cast long, spindly pieces in a soft rubber to prevent breakage, McFarlane elects to cast them in the same hard plastic as the rest of the figure. And I'm sure you can imagine how that works out for a movie which has nothing but characters with long, spindly features. One of the reasons I waited so long to open these figures is because General Wellington's mustache is so long and gets so tiny towards the ends that I'm afraid to do anything much with him in case it breaks, and I've seen lots of copies of Alfred with half his mustache missing for just that reason. And it's a real shame because Wellington is actually decently articulated given his lanky frame. The hinge at the neck is pretty good just as long as you're extremely careful about the facial hair. We also have swivel hips and knee bends and ball joints at the shoulders. While there are certainly some limitations here, I think this is about the best you could do with how thin this design is in places. Or at least that's what I would say if Victor didn't have fucking double-jointed knees and elbows. It's absolutely insane that they even attempted that. Half their modern stuff with normal proportions don't even have those, yet here they are on a character with limbs as thick as a single spaghetti noodle. How well do they work?
Well, that went as well as could be expected, didn't it?
Also included with this figure was Scraps, currently missing 2 of his legs, further showing just how fragile these things can be. I can't say for certain whether the elbows suffer from the same problem. Victor and Emily are the only characters to have more than one figure each, and this particular version of Victor removes the elbow joints altogether. Is Scraps really that heavy that Victor needs his elbows fused in place to hold him up? Not that they'd help much anyway, since the shoulders and hips can only go straight forward and back. Now I know this looks bad, but with the limited range and how tiny the feet are, this hip wasn't really doing much anyway, and thanks to Victor's scrawny femboy build, it kinda just slots back in. When it comes to display, your only real option is having the character standing up straight on the included base. They're all pretty nicely detailed for what they are, but they're not as exciting as they could be, and I think I could say the same for the paint on Victor as well. As in the movie itself, the colours on the living characters are very desaturated compared to their dead counterparts. And while this is as it should be, I also feel that the detailing isn't quite as impressive. While Victor has the appropriate shading around his eyes, he's missing the bags beneath them, making him look a little lifeless compared to the film. Likewise, what should be a very subtle blue highlight on Scraps is just splattered on very haphazardly. All he needed was a quick dry brush, but instead he looks like he's been rolling around in blueberries. On a fundamental level, translating Corpse Bride into an action figure line was always going to be a struggle. Ironically, despite his frequent use of stop motion, Tim Burton's character designs don't really lend themselves very well to existing in 3D space. Even the puppets used in the film were a nightmare for the animators, needing their feet screwed down at all times to keep them from toppling over. Even so, these issues are only compounded by McFarlane's approach. The archaic articulation leaves the experience feeling stiff at best and unnerving at worst. And even though the figures look incredible, their overly brittle nature means that looking is all you'll ever be able to do with them, leaving any attempt at innovation feeling hollow. A very mixed bag overall. I began this video by highlighting some of the similarities between Corpse Bride and Curse of the Were-Rabbit, but there are also ways in which they're complete polar opposites. One such difference is the way the film's respective merchandise has evolved since their release. Corpse Bride has developed into a gigantic merchandising empire, especially around Halloween, though to be fair, it is riding off of Nightmare Before Christmas to some extent. Conversely, Curse of the Were-Rabbit's merch presence has been completely non-existent since its release. Due to DreamWorks' partial ownership of the movie, it's treated as something of a black sheep within the wider Wallace and Gromit franchise, excluded from Blu-ray collections and calendar pages despite its massive historical significance. And while its original characters do occasionally make the jump to new media, it hasn't translated into any new toys, even as the duo's merchandise footprint continues to grow exponentially. Nonetheless, when the movie was in theaters, it was accompanied by a lot of tie-in material of its very own, including the McFarlane line. This was an exciting prospect as, up to this point, the only decent plastic representation of the characters were these tiny figurines from a close shave. I never had Gromit when I was a kid, so his role was played by this cow.
Wallace, get away from the fucking steering wheel! You're way too drunk to drive! Give me the keys, lad! I need to go for a spin, I do!
With all that said, let's see how the McFarlane toys stack up as we examine Wallace and Gromit's first and thus far only foray into articulated action figures. unless you count Bear Brick.
Nah, we're not gonna be doing that.
As with Corpse Bride, I'm once again limited as to what figures I can get my hands on, so these two Wallace variants will be serving as the line's ambassadors today, and they are some pretty solid representatives. The sculpt and paint once again captures the look of the characters exceptionally well. The zigzag pattern on Wallace's fancy vest is very well done, and both of them even have some lumps and bumps in their clothing to emulate the look of plasticine. Overall, these figures feature the high level of detail one would expect from McFarlane. In fact, they may be a little too detailed in places. You may notice that the inside of the mouths have been painted black. While that seems like a logical choice, on the actual puppets, Wallace's mouth is the same colour as the rest of his head, making this a slight inaccuracy. I'm not sure why they'd bother, since it just makes it easier to spot when the paint isn't exactly right. This weird detailing priority carries over to the accessories, or lack thereof in some cases. Each of the figures features a very nicely detailed base, a lot nicer than the Corpse Bride ones to be honest, but the distribution of details and accessories feels very lopsided. Anti-Pesto Wallace gets a pretty sizable base, complete with a garden gnome, 2 pumpkins and a great big marrow. Yes, marrow.
How is that prize marrow of yours coming on? How is that prize melon of yours coming on?
Additionally, he has 2 handheld accessories, a torch and a rabbit grabber. Fancy Wallace has a much less impressive array, with a cauliflower, a couple turnips and nothing else. The one saving grace is that the base can be interlocked with Lady Tottington's, but individually it's pretty weak compared to his other look. This line has 8 figures in it, 9 if you count the 10-inch were-rabbit, and it's just crazy how much more shit Anti-Pesto Wallace gets than any of the others. It's also weird that we never got Wallace in his regular green outfit, so I guess we'll have to make do with Hutch.
I'm Wallace.
Where these figures are more evenly matched is the articulation, which is itself very strangely executed. One little micro trend I quite like is that sometimes when a company makes toys based on a stop-motion property, they seemingly design them in a way that encourages stop-motion. Revoltech's Jack Skellington includes a wide variety of replacement faces akin to the puppets from the film, while NECA has Coraline toys that include transparent stands, facilitating you to make your own animations. McFarlane's Wallace and Gromit figures attempt something similar, though the execution is somewhat primitive in comparison. And I think primitive is a very appropriate description, because look at those long-ass gorilla arms. It turns out there is actually a reason for this though. In order to emulate the way the claymation models move, the limbs are made of a soft rubber with a bendy wire inside, allowing them to be posed without breaking the sculpt. Now in theory this is a decent idea, but the execution leaves a bit to be desired. Unlike the thick plasticine used in the movie, which is stuck directly onto the wire armatures, these overlays are pretty thin and hollow, and moving them makes them collapse in on themselves in a very ugly way. On Wallace specifically, his arms and legs are rubberized while his torso is a regular hard plastic, and moving his hips too far will make his bottom half start to pull away from his top in a very disturbing fashion. Strangely, the official description for this figure lists its articulation points as neck and shoulders, so I don't even know for certain if I'm supposed to be doing this.
Am I breaking it? Is this breaking it? Please God, let's just be breaking it.
Even including the rubber parts, the posability isn't all that great. The parts that aren't rubberized are nothing more than swivels, and the parts that are can't hit anything close to what's shown in promotional pics. Well, there is an explanation for that too. Both Wallace and Gromit and Corpse Bride have an articulated 6-inch line, which I've been looking at, and a smaller non-articulated 4-inch line, with several designs shared between them. And McFarlane's promotional material likes to use the same stock photos interchangeably for both. Between that and inaccurate descriptions, it's really fucking annoying trying to figure out what each figure can actually do. Like, I'm pretty sure this Wallace can swivel at the wrist, but the website makes no mention of it, and his hand was already broken off before I even took him out of the box, so now I'm scared to try anyway. Yeah, despite their much chunkier designs, Wallace and Gromit aren't immune to the same durability problems as Corpse Bride. Bravo on using transparent plastic for the joints in both of these lines. I love it when my action figures just crumble to dust. While the articulation scheme on these figures was a creative attempt to replicate the functionality of the claymation puppets, the execution leaves them feeling less like action figures and more like Bendhams. That wouldn't be so bad on its own, but combined with the fragility of the hard plastic parts and the lack of accessories in most cases, they're nowhere near as playable as they should be. Ironically, that also means that despite taking a completely different route, they end up in pretty much the exact same place as the Corpse Bride toys, showing that once again these movies are more similar than one might initially suspect. Specifically, they both serve as perfect examples of what McFarlane was like at the time, with figures focused on exquisite detail, often at the expense of everything else. And although there was a clear attempt to innovate the articulation here, they still lag behind in the places where it really matters. Overall, these lines are perfectly serviceable if you're looking for a display piece of the characters from the films, but as articulated action figures, they're nothing more than relics of a bygone era, and I certainly can't abide paying the $100 or more that they often go for online. But hey, if Beetlejuice and Shrek can get their 20-year-old toys re-released, maybe the same can happen here, and then I could possibly justify it. But for now, I'd recommend just enjoying the movies themselves as a little slice of Halloween.
Knickers.